The point of view that you have is completely different because if you allow the topmost level of Zoom interact with the bottommost level of Zoom, I think things don't always go very well. And I think that's a PM's job to essentially be the shield between those layers in a way that everyone gets communicated what they need communicated to them, and that you can measure the success in a way that's meaningful to all those people at the end of the day.
Welcome to Launch Pod, a product management podcast from LogRocket. Today, our guest is Roman Gunn, Vice President of Product at Zeta Global, a cloud-based marketing technology company that focuses on multi-channel marketing tools. On today's episode, LogRocket's VP of Marketing, Jeff Wharton, talks with Roman about addressing real customer problems with AI, utilizing a Workback plan focused on a design North Star, how Rick Rubin influenced Roman's own first principles thinking, and how to create products that can be elegant enough to solve everyday problems, but flexible enough to also solve the advanced problems. So here it is, our conversation with Roman Gunn.
Hey, Roman, thanks so much for joining. Great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jeff.
Yeah. I think of people I've talked to, I've had the good luck of talking to lots of PMs at this point. And you have one of the cooler stories about how you actually got in, right? There's always people had jobs, people did this. But I think you're the first person I met who got in via propaganda. Can you maybe
call it manifestation?
Yeah, there you go. Can we talk maybe a little bit about that and just want to lead in with, how did you get to where you are now? What's the story that got Roman from back in the day to now?
Yeah, so it all started with a resume that I was working on. So I was fortunate enough to have some really great designer friends. And one night I said, I want to make a really awesome resume. And then we worked back for what is a resume? And we landed on really, it's essentially a piece of propaganda. So that resume evolved into a giant propaganda poster featuring my silhouette. And we just ran with it. And the tagline on it was, "Who is Roman Gunn?" And as we started evolving that, it just was a lot of fun. So we started creating propaganda posters based on various historical time periods, like Soviet Union type propaganda posters, like Gandhi's posters, Uncle Sam Wants You posters, pretty much like all the greatest hits of history featuring my silhouette, just proclaiming Roman Gunn wants you, essentially.
Now, were you in PM at that point, or how'd that tie back to the job?
So at that point, I was doing quite a bit of freelancing, some freelance copywriting, freelance what's called producer work from the agency side. It hasn't really evolved into being a true PM at that point yet.
Okay, so that kind of segued into some more design roles, it sounds like. And then how'd you work from design into kind of more what seems to be a more product focused role now?
Yeah, so it was really marketing focused. And because I was so close with a bunch of great designers that I brought into the company, so we were working on various new products I started working with them to help them design out what was happening. And because I started putting together the requirements, I started being the one that communicated that to the engineers. And as I was being the one that was communicating with engineers and the designers, I was then communicating right back to the stakeholders and investors, and it evolved from there.
I can appreciate a good straight line story, but
yeah,
it's always fun to hear that, I designed a propaganda poster and here I am now working at Zeta Global, doing all these generative AI projects and stuff like that. And in between was a whole melange of curvy roads. It's the journey that gets us the interesting stories, right? Now, talk about Zeta. We had the good fortune of having you on the Spotlight interview series earlier. And I was able to kind of look back on that. And there's some interesting points, I think, that came up and that you've referenced, and other times you've talked about how you run projects. But do we want to kick off with just, what does the role look like? I know you have multiple pods there, but what does the role look like? What are you focused on right now? Like, what's getting you going right now?
Yeah, I think right now we're really focusing on how do you take AI and distribute it to the people? Like, how do you take this concept of creating agents and letting the everyday person essentially create their own AI assistant to do the jobs that are reported to them instead of the jobs that the product manager has prioritized or the engineer has built or the designer really wanted to get in because it was cool and shiny. It's, hey, how do we really get the people the foundation elements they need to achieve their job to be done?
And I really like the part you talked about where you start with a work-back plan. And I think I get what that is. I'm not in product. We always talk about, we run our marketing team here like a product, and we sell to product managers and product teams a lot. So I've talked to more than my fair share probably of PM leaders, but Can you explain to me a little bit like this idea of a work back plan and what does that mean and what does that mean in practice too?
So I love to start with something called a design North Star.
Mhm.
So essentially work with great design folk to create a end state that we're trying to reach. What is the ultimate thing that we're moving towards? And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to use all our standardized components. It doesn't have to have all the answers in terms of deep flows, but it has ultimately where and why we're going. And because of that, it brings the reality of the end state much closer. It starts to one, feel more attainable and feasible. And two, it gives a common language and something for people to point towards. I think that one of the things that I've learned in my career is that it's unfair to make people imagine at times. You want to give them something to reference. And by having a visual aid that they can say, oh, this is one, polished, two, this has all the elements that I want, and three, like, how do we get there now? I think that's the thing that we really try to build. And then based on that, we then start creating different phases of how do we build towards that, right? So we start figuring out what are the most essential solutions, what are the solutions that scale into other parts of the product, and essentially the entire architecture of how it's going to work. But it all starts with this is where we're going. Because without that, I think a lot of companies fall into what I call the incremental march to nowhere. They just build and measure, but where are you going? It's great that you moved like another mile, but a mile towards what? So that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah, makes sense. And when you're building that work back plan, what are you working back from? Because there's always, I think, given the nature of products you work on, you could be looking at where you're going to be 3 years out. Where do you want to be a year out? There's always this kind of idea of what's critical. And then there's all the add-on things that you could add on. Are you starting from the end state? Are you starting from what's the minimum we need to do to launch what we need to launch initially and then go, or how does that work? How are you looking at all the additional things you can do afterwards?
Yeah. So we start with the end state and then we figure out what are the most impactful points in getting there. What are the things that the industry demands right now? And what are the biggest opportunities for us to grab? Because I always find it's interesting to balance between the necessity, the function, and the sizzle, right? You have to deliver both in lockstep because you're going to be missing out on different buyer types if you don't focus on both. So I always try to think of both the tactical and the strategic. So though that you always have to like the way I talk to PMs about this sometimes, it's like, look, you have to think about 60 to 70% functional ethics that people aren't going to necessarily like celebrate or share, but it's going to make their life significantly easier. They're going to be locked into your ecosystem. And the other 30 to 40% is going to be the things that cause people to buy your platform in the first place.
And do you have a process for how you understand what those different elements are? Are you talking to customers? Is it gut feel? Is it a little bit of both or something else?
Yeah, so you definitely need to work with individual business units you have. You definitely need to work with the people who are in the weeds actually using the platform because those things aren't aligned always. And then you do have to intuit a bit of where are things going to go, right? Because it's one thing to build what a competitor has. It's another thing to say, I want to be better than a competitor. And you can't do that by copying. You have to do that by finding inspiration. And sometimes that inspiration is best found not within a competitor. It's best found within an entirely different space. Because I think one of the things that I've appreciated working in an agency environment earlier in my career is being able to see how much of the problem sets we try to tackle are similar from industry to industry. There's a lot of, if you do some good pattern matching, like 70% baseline of problems are the same. Like how do we like templatize things and scale them and make them repeatable? And we operationalize the folks that are hands-on keyboard. How do we keep the strategic users happy? And it's safe from industry to industry. The difference is the working solution. So if you think about those different pillars that you have to hit, you have to pattern match against it. And now that you know that the pattern's there, you just look at like the most interesting and compelling and easy solution, even if it doesn't come directly from your field.
Yeah, I mean, that's where, right, having experiences across lots of things, like we said, the windy road gets you to it. So, now, I think you have when I was reading our background here, you have 5 pods over at Zeta. What are they focused on? It's not just all generative AI, is it?
No, it's not. At Zeta, we actually have before the pod layer level, the layers. So we have the intelligence layer, which is where all the pods that I hit up are. Then we also have the experience layer and the data layer. So the data layer is all about how we ingest information, how we make sure that there's great governance around that, great security around it, et cetera. We have the experience layer for how do you execute on all these things? How do you actually create segments? How do you send your emails? How do you target on CTV or other display channels or direct mail, et cetera? Then you have the intelligence layer, which is how do you combine all of the data that's ingested into something that's meaningful and actionable? And in order to do that, we have things like analytics, we have things like forecasting, we have things like recommendations, we have things like personalization, and we have things like MLOps and generative AI. So those are kind of the pods that we're tackling. And the next pod that we're going to be standing up is going to be splitting off attribution from analytics into its own dedicated space.
I won't get on my soapbox today, but attribution is one of the ones that I have lots of opinions.
Come this summer when the cookieless world kind of crumbles, we're going to have to figure out how do we really attribute it in a meaningful way? What's this right point of view to have in a world where people do want to feel like they're secure, that their privacy is being respected, but they also still get the relevant type of marketing to them. So that's something that we really have to focus on. How does the marketer really credit the right channel? Because, you have last touch models, first touch models, all those models are out of touch. So we have to figure out like the right way to do it.
It's such an interesting problem. I've worked at, I think, 10 plus companies at this point over 20 years of working in marketing, and no one does it the same. And I don't think anyone's dead on right, but I don't think any of them are dead on wrong either. So it's just it's a passionate topic of mine. I digress.
Yes. No, I think this is right, and that this is going to be the big challenge. I think again, come this summer, where it's just like this is an opportunity for people to unite on what is the formula for this. Can we standardize this? Lots of other technologies, whether it's USB-C or whatever have you, they've said, okay, enough of all the wires. Let's pick a universal standard. Maybe it's time for attribution to do the same.
I would be one of the happiest people on earth, I think, if that happened. It's been, my background is marketing, operations, demand gen, growth, and then brand came later. So this is something that's been near and dear to my literal daily life for 20 years. So,
well, we're hiring. So if you have like great PMs that you want to come on over for this, let's do it. Let's solve the problem.
I would love if you guys solve the problem. Let's stay close on this, because I want to make sure, I want to hear what you guys are working on. But in that, even with those different pods you have, I assume, and especially given other teams as well, people don't operate, or people can't possibly be operating at the same cadence. So while you have this kind of work-back plan, does it implement, or what does it look day to day different kind of between some of the teams that maybe are doing, like analytics is, I'm sure, been around a while. It's a little more advanced. There's a lot of stuff built there. Gen AI or some of that stuff is probably a little bit more new, and you're figuring out what you're doing. Do those teams operate differently under you? Do you try and keep them in the same process, or how does that work? How do you accommodate both?
So I embrace freedom. I think that you always have to meet deliverables. You always have to meet towards a business North Star, and you always have to be incrementing. Mm-hmm. But you have to do it in a way that makes sense for the team and product line that you're working on. To your point, the big difference between analytics and Gen AI is at once R&D and development. You're executing and figuring out how to execute all at once. It's interesting because one of the partners that we have that we work with is Langsmith or LangChain for going and creating our agents. And when we started on this adventure almost a year ago, we were contributing to their open source library because we needed these features, right? So you're like developing and helping the frameworks build in real time as you're building them, because it doesn't exist, right? Like you're literally laying the groundwork that you need and that others that are going to come after you are going to utilize as well. So it becomes a very difficult and interesting challenge, which is different than, analytics, which is, okay, great. We have all these pipelines. We have all these metrics and dimensions. We're going to be ingesting data from 120 different sources for an individual client. How do you build a data mapping tool to standardize all these things and report on them? I don't want to say that one is a solved problem, but it's a much more understood problem, while the other one, you're developing solutions on the fly. So because of that, the process and how you work with a team is going to be a little bit more flexible, right? So for analytics, maybe your PRDs are super concise and you're like, no, this is exactly how we're going to aggregate. This is the exact universal formula we're going to work on. This is exactly how we standardize. Whereas with something that's a little bit more recent, you're not going to have that luxury because the technology is evolving right underneath your feet. Like we build with the assumption that one, everything that we build has to be modular because there's going to be a better version of it in the next 3 months that we can plug and play and replace. And two, we can't think about the tooling that exists today. We have to know where we're going and build understanding that everything is going to be imperfect and it's going to evolve. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny because we're going through, I can relate really heavily to that. We've been continuously building out our analytics platform. And as one of our own key stakeholders is our marketing team. We're big consumers of analytics. And so we've worked closely with the PM team here, which has been great. But there is definitely a cadence of just, we know we need to have these kinds of graphs. We need to be able to query these data points. And it's just, analytics is a bit of a laundry list at sometimes. We also launched what we call Galileo AI, which is our AI. Basically, it's, the function, the way we think about it internally is it's basically you have a junior PM who can watch every single session within our product. You can watch every session replay. It analyzes every user path and surfaces patterns and behaviors and problems to you and to your product team. And that's been the really interesting thing because
that's awesome.
I talk to that product team a lot, and there's always just something new that blows your mind about what they're doing. And the path to get there is often, like you said, we have the Workback plan, and then how we get there is a little circuitous. Analytics is just, this week we're going to deliver this, then this.
Analytics is a map.
Yeah.
Gen AI is a little bit more GPS based. We know the destination, but this street's going to be closed. That one's going to be under construction, and a superhighway just got built right in front of you.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a superhighway, but also an odyssey at the same time. You know about where you're going, but the route to get there is a little circuitous, and you got monsters on the way and adventures and all sorts of stuff. But it's gonna end up. I got to ask you about this because when you were going through and talking about your process, you referenced a thought leader who I don't hear talked a lot about in normal books or PM. I'll be honest, it's not talking about a lot of the PM stuff I read. Rick Rubin and his whole idea of basically reduce, get to the essence, get to the core truth. Where did that come from? And how does that, how do you actually apply that? What's that look like in practice? I agree with you, by the way. I think it's a great reference, but I didn't expect it, I'm going to be honest.
That's that lateral path for you. It goes back to the essence of what you're solving, right? Some may call it first principles, but you're really just looking at what are you trying to achieve? And what are you trying to achieve if you forget the weight of what's already been? I think a lot of people, and this is why, again, I love the visual North Star that we build and not being constrained by components that we have or processes that we have, because it's about what are you really going after? What is the truth of what you're trying to do? I think a lot of people, they start with, these are all the constraints I have, and then let me work from there. I think you have to start by treating PMs, engineers, and designers as artists. And artists need to start with white space and motivation. And then as the time draws near, you can start closing in the space and layering in more requirements, layering in more constraints, layering in a hard deadline instead of a soft deadline. And all of these things allow for the artist to then really channel their inner muse. Because I do think that it's interesting that people start coming up with solution sets that are really similar in different companies in different parts of the world all around the same time. It's because the information that we're taking in is universal in a way. So why not let the people that you hire to be the experts of that wield the universe in their favor?
I kind of love what we can extrapolate from there is everyone views first principles thinking as this kind of San Francisco startup VC thing. In reality, it was a rap pioneer. It'll be a lot more.
Comes from counterculture.
That's the thing where you look at all that kind of stuff. That's, like you said, the idea of lateral thought is so important, even micro and macro. I avoided my soapbox once on attribution, but to quickly tie back, I grew up through the whole demand gen, UTM codes, and multi-touch attribution. And it wasn't until I started to get into more leadership positions and thought about brand and all that kind of stuff. When you look at it and you realize, and I think my push towards brand and actually being a marketing executive here who ran a whole team, had to think about more than just payback, was I realized this idea of complex attribution didn't really matter. When you got to brand, it's just there's a couple core things that people will come to because they're looking for a product. And the big thing they come to is because they've heard of you. And brand is like the overwhelming tailwind that can destroy any other attribution metric. And it was just kind of, I thought just getting outside my little bubble, even just a little bit, I think made me so much better at thinking about my role there, and curious to see how that's kind of applied and worked with you. Because I would wager, given your more kind of design background and some of the other stories, there's some good stuff here.
Yeah, I love what you just said about expanding out. So the way I talk about it is having different levels of Zoom. And I think that you need to have different levels of Zoom depending on the stakeholders that you're speaking with. Because you can have the exact same project, but the way you're going to speak with a junior engineer who really needs specific requirements is different than the way you're going to speak with a designer who wants to be motivated to create something beautiful, which is to be different than the executive that you're speaking to that wants to figure out the ROI on a team that you put together. How is this going to impact our market position versus competitor X, right? And you're still building the exact same thing in every scenario. But the point of view that you have is completely different because it speaks to the different elements, the macroeconomics of the market, of the way that your brand is positioned, any sort of business headwinds or tailwinds, and the reality of teams. And I think that one of the things that you have to do with teams is you have to be their tailwind, right? Because I think that if you allow the topmost level of Zoom interact with the bottommost level of Zoom, I think things don't always go very well. And I think that's a great PM's job, is to kind of essentially be the umbrella or the shield between those layers in a way that everyone gets communicated what they need communicated to them, and that you can measure the success in a way that's meaningful to all those people at the end of the day.
I love that. You gotta be your team's own tailwind. It's funny. I feel like once in a while you meet people who are great at putting out like a big view into a tiny soundbite. And I feel like there's a few of those with you. I love talking to people like that, because I think at some point being able to do and lead is important, but also you can boil things down, like you said, with the Rick Rubin idea, boil it down to its essence. There's just a lot of power in having those kind of couple core, really tight operating principles and be your team's tailwind.
Well, thank you. So I can't credit what I'm about to say, but I think all of this started with me hearing the expression, brevity is the essence of elegance. I heard that and it really stuck with me. I don't know where I heard it, but I know I was fairly in what I did, and it just latched on. That's what caused this.
Yeah, I always tell people, I think I'm probably going to get skewered if this is wrong, but I think it's a Mark Twain quote about, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. And I always love that kind of stuff. I think you had another one that I read, and I don't know if this is, maybe I just picked this out of something you said, or maybe you say this frequently. I'd love if it was frequent, because that'd be cool. But you talked about basically as PMs, you stitch the superhero cape, but the users are the ones who are wearing it. What do you mean by that? What does that kind of mean, I guess, to you, and how does that come out in kind of end use?
Yeah, so I think that you can build features that have a linear path, and all features should have a very specific use case that they solve for, and everyone can use it universally in the exact same way. But I think what makes a feature powerful is when you give it enough flexibility to become a tool for a marketer or a ticket selling rep or a journalist or anybody to wield into whatever use case that they have. I think the goal is to build tools that are elegant enough to solve the everyday problem, but flexible enough to solve the advanced problems. And I know some people really hate the terminology of having an advanced or pro user, but that's to say that there's always going to be a variety of use cases. So for instance, this agent ecosystem that we're building, the goal here is obviously you create an agent that's going to help you write a subject line. You can create an agent that's going to help you write a PR break. But what if you write an agent that helps you automate your marketing experience? What if you write an agent that helps you dedupe audiences? What if you write an agent that helps you forecast merchandising? These are all use cases that people have. And if you build something that is a building block, something that is a sandbox that other people can build upon, then you have much more compelling experiences built into your platform. So it's not just the junior person who can get their entire workflow done quickly and consistently. It's the person that now has the impossible deadline that they have to hit that can do it. Those are the types of features that I love to build.
That kind of brings up just the general, something that I have gathered very quickly. I think the same way I have a lot of opinions of attribution. I will talk about them at length if people don't stop me. I think AI and the kind of just the explosion we've seen lately in this is somewhat that of yours. And I don't disagree with you there. I that's another dangerous topic I can go on for a while on, but I really liked you talked about like an AI agent is like a secret agent. It's all about the tools it has access to. So I guess AI in general, what's your view and how is this best used? Like what are we going to see in the next couple of years here, do you think?
So I think what we're going to see in the next couple of years is there's going to be two different things we're going to see. We're going to see the human side and we're going to see the technology side. I think from the human side, we're going to see something interesting. I think that over the last 30 years or so, the term Luddite has meant laggard. It's meant the person at the end of the adoption cycle of the technology, just because they didn't want to, for the most part, not necessarily because of ethical concerns or what is this going to mean for my career, anything of that nature. And I think that's shifting. I think that the term Luddite is actually being wielded in a new way now by a generation of folks who are very aware of what this technology is capable of. I think they're actually wielding it in a way that says, hey, I understand what this can do to industry. I understand the power here. And I think we need to have conversations around what is permissible and what isn't, and how do we roll this into society. So I think that's a really interesting conversation that we're going to keep experiencing over the next several years. And I think you're going to see people do one of a few things. You're going to see the people who just adopt it, easy, great. You're going to see the people who offer up some resistance, and then they start playing with the tooling and they realize, oh, wow, this is going to make me way better at what I do. So let me put this into my toolbox. You're going to have people who play around, understand what you can do, and say, oh, no, I need to reject this because this is going to be no bueno. And then there's going to be the folks that are just going to be the laggards because they're laggards, right? And I think both sides of the let's call it the spectrum are easy to figure out what's going to happen there. I think the middle is going to be interesting. I think the people that adopt this technology are going to find a way to up-level their careers. And I think there's going to be a career reshuffle that happens in the next few years because there's going to be people that utilize this technology and elevate themselves simply because they decided that I'm going to. And then there's going to be folks that fall behind because they decide not to. And I think that it would behoove everyone to just say, hey, it's here. As government doesn't always work so fast to regulate. So let's do the best that we can with understanding and utilizing in a way to help ourselves. And I think we're going to see that play out in many different ways over the next few years. From a technology standpoint, I think it's fair to say that OpenAI is the biggest game in town right now. I think it's going to diversify over the next few years. And I think what we're going to see is it's not going to be around who has the best model to achieve X. It's going to be who's great at stringing together models to achieve X, Y, Z. Chaining together agents, chaining together models, that orchestration level, that's going to be what crowns the king in this space. And I think that's going to be super, super exciting. And I'm very particularly excited for creatives in the coming years. I know there's still some fun and discomfort there with a certain subset of creatives, but I can see some of the best ad work of decades coming out shortly, because people that traditionally don't have access to tooling are suddenly going to have access to really powerful tools. And I'm very excited to see what comes out of that.
I feel like what we've seen so far here has been, it's just such a wide spectrum of outcomes, right? You have people saying we can just generate content and this kind of stuff, and you can just just put the whole job onto the AI. And that I think has worked medium well at best. There's people coming up with like very focused use cases, or enabling looking at bigger sets of data or augmenting human processes, and that's been at least what I've seen is some of the best outcomes has been, how can I brainstorm through 100 different ideas really fast? And it kind of gives inspiration points. Or how can I pull themes out of a huge set of data? Kind of our focus here product-wise has been, how do you basically give this tool to have a machine watch every user session? If you are recording 10 million sessions and you need to pull out insights and themes from that kind of stuff. But also, actually, we used it to help us name the podcast. We had several ideas and gave it the theme, and it ran through, and most of them were terrible. But it did give us those kind of themes of, oh, we didn't think about this way or that way, and dove in it. But it sparked some good conversations that I don't think we would have otherwise had. But in the end, a few of us really sitting together and talking through and bringing the human element got it done and got us the final kind of outcome there. But it sparked us and helped us move, I think, faster than we otherwise would have.
This is a collaborator. This is 100% a collaborator, not a replacement. It's just the same way that people use Photoshop to edit photos, right? It's just something that helps you do the job. It doesn't take away the job.
Yeah, I think I heard you reference it once. You called like the command line for people or something. I thought that was just so smart because the command line, it's a good, I think, luckily everyone on this podcast knows what the command line is, but it doesn't do anything by itself, but it can help you do stuff faster, or it's another set of tools that can help you operate faster or augment. But to go back real quick, you kind of talked about chaining agents in a series, and I not here, but in my own kind of just like personal experimentation with this stuff, have tried things around this. And what I've always seen is it's cool and theoretically should work, right? You have one tightly bounded workflow, another tightly bounded workflow, another tightly bounded workflow, and you just think like iteratively it should work well, and you're controlling risk. But you always run this thing of, I think about it similar to how you think about experiments in a business when you're forecasting. Stacking risk is not just 5% and 5% and 5%. They compound on each other. So how do you see that evolving, where if you're stacking a bunch of AI workflows or AI agents, each one of those is kind of exponentially potentially increasing error or something like that?
So I might be giving away some secret sauce here, but I think a part of it is that every subsequent agent has to have the context of the agent before it. Right now, people are saying, hey, agent A is really good at task A, agent B is really good at task B. So when task A is done, pass it to task B. But it needs to refer back to what happened in task B to properly understand what to do next, right? It needs to understand that it's a part of an assembly line. And it also needs to have that data passed over in a way that is meaningful and parsable for the LLM. So I think that there's the context that needs to come in. And there's also what's that standardized way of actually chaining. And I don't think that there's a great standard for it yet. And I think those are things that are going to evolve.
I think the workflow I've heard people reference, I don't have experience with it, but is, can you ask the previous agent how confident it is in the answer?
There's definitely the confidence level perspective for sure. But I think a part of it is, if you consider an agent to essentially just be a simulation or any LLM interaction to be a simulation machine that figures out, hey, I am explicitly this, out of all the things that can be in the universe, I am this, that this has to understand and be an auditor of the prior this, right? Like it needs to, within its context, understand that your job is to audit the prior step. So and that's a problem that you get context window issues there and whatnot. But I think these are all very solvable problems.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess we're coming up on time here, and I want to make sure we get you out of here on time. But if we're looking at where we are in this kind of roadmap or whatever odyssey we're on of AI, it seems like this year is going to be a year where, if last year was kind of chat application, chat interface, this year looks more like everyone's going all in on agents. But there's a lot of things go wrong there, but everyone can make one, which isn't necessarily a good thing. What does that lead us to? Let's close down with, what does that mean when everyone can make an agent?
It means a lot of them are going to be garbage, and we're going to have to really, that's what it means. And I think we're going to have to create a standard for figuring out, one, good prompting into what makes an agent successful. And I think that frameworks around the best way to prompt right now are a dime a dozen. But I don't think that there's a framework for chaining agents. I don't think there's a real framework for how to get confidence levels out of these things that are accurate, and how to make sure that every single one is fine-tuned. I think those are all things that have to evolve. And I think, again, the same way that anytime a new technology comes out, there's going to be lots of people that come into the space, they get VC dollars and that die out. And there's going to be one or two that are exceptional and are going to, be the stewards of the space. We're going to see a lot of that. And I think it's really exciting. I think that just seeing, I forget what the name of it is, Sora, the new video model that's coming out. These things are evolving so quickly that there's always going to be something around the bend. And that's why I keep saying you have to build with the perspective of, I am trying to achieve X and I'm going to make it modular so that when the right model for doing XYZ is there, I can plug that in. So I think it now more than ever, you have to be firm on where you're going and why you're going there. And you have to be okay with the details and technical implementations being fuzzy at the moment or imperfect at the moment, because they can be there, but they're not going to generate the content quality that you want. We constantly get asked to add an image generation for brands into the product. And I'm just like, it's not there yet. You can keep asking, but it's just, I don't feel comfortable releasing a product that is going to be suboptimal. And there's great players in the space that are getting closer to being able to do things, not just, create a wartime photo from 1978 that looks like XYZ, right? But like, create an actual template for this type of thing and make it actually take in the context of brand assets, take in the context of the user types and all that. It's still not quite there. I will say that Midjourney is probably the closest, but it's an evolving space. Know where you're going, know why you're going, increment there, and then plug and play the elements that aren't performant today. That's essentially what it is.
It's our version. It's our current version of people used to build for where Moore's law predicted we were going to be by the time it would hit. So someone will have to figure out a pathway to predict this advancement and all that so people can do it. But I think that's a great way to look at it. Roman, I really appreciate you coming on, man. This is great. I love to talk about this and always happy when I can stick Rick Rubin into a conversation about product management.
Absolutely, Jeff. Have a good one.